There's a plant growing in the ditch beside every Amish farm in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana right now. It grows in gravel. It grows in clay. It grows in soil so depleted nothing else will touch it. One plant produces over 200,000 seeds in a single season. It spreads so aggressively that the USDA classified it as a noxious weed in 38 states. Farmers are legally required to destroy it on contact. And the Amish are growing it on purpose. They plant it in dedicated rows. They harvest it in August. They dry it in bundles and store it in the same root cellars where they keep their food. The same plant the government says you must kill, they treat like medicine, like food, and like a tool their great-grandparents refused to give up. That plant contains more iron than spinach, more vitamin C than oranges, and a compound that researchers at 3 separate universities have now flagged as a potential regulator of blood sugar. It was used in field hospitals during the Civil War to stop bleeding in under 4 minutes. Frontier midwives carried it in their kits for over a century. A single poultice of its leaves was the standard treatment for infected wounds before the pharmaceutical industry decided infection required a prescription. It costs nothing to grow, it requires no fertilizer, it thrives in drought, it comes back every single year without replanting. One patch, roughly the size of a parking space, produces enough medicinal leaf material to supply a household for 12 months. And in 2015, the FDA quietly moved to restrict the sale of products derived from it, citing, and this is their exact language, insufficient evidence of safety. A plant with 4,000 years of continuous human use. A plant that Civil War surgeons trusted when they had nothing else. A plant that indigenous communities across North America, Europe, and Asia all independently discovered and independently used for the same purposes without ever meeting each other. Insufficient evidence. The Amish did not accept that. They never do. And in this video I am going to show you exactly what this plant is, why it was targeted, who benefits from you not knowing about it, and how you can grow it in your own yard legally, quietly, and starting this season. Stay with me because what comes next is going to make you very angry, and then it is going to make you very useful. The plant is broadleaf plantain, Plantago major, and its recorded history does not begin in a century or a decade, it begins in a millennium. The first written record of its medicinal use comes from China in the year 48 AD, in a text called the Shenong Benkao Jiang, the Divine Farmer's Classic of Roots and Herbs. It was listed there as a treatment for urinary inflammation, wound infection, and respiratory illness. The Chinese physician who documented it was not discovering something new. He was recording something that farmers and healers had already been using for generations before he wrote it down. 11,000 kilometers away, and with no possible contact, Greek physicians were doing the same thing. Dioscorides, writing in the 1st century AD, described plantain's ability to close wounds, reduce swelling, and draw venom from insect stings. He called it one of the most reliably useful plants a traveler could carry. Roman legions brought it with them across Europe not as cargo but as seed embedded in the mud on the soles of their sandals. Wherever Rome marched, plantain followed. The Anglo-Saxons eventually named it waybread, meaning bread of the road, because it grew wherever soldiers walked. By the 9th century, it appeared in the medical manuscripts of Charlemagne's court physicians. By the 12th century, the German abbess Hildegard von Bingen, one of the most documented healers in medieval European history, had catalogued 17 distinct uses for it, including as a drawing agent for infected splinters and as a compress for burns. When European settlers arrived in North America, they found something that stopped them cold. The Cherokee, the Ojibwe, the Iroquois, the Navajo, peoples who had never read Dioscorides, who had never heard of Hildegard, were already using the same plant for the same wounds in the same way. Not a similar plant, the same one, Plantago major. China, Rome, medieval Germany, and 4 separate indigenous nations on a continent those civilizations had never visited, all arriving at the same conclusion independently across 2,000 years. That is not coincidence, that is proof, and the people who decided it knew exactly what they were doing. For most of American history, broadleaf plantain was not a weed, it was a crop. In the 1800s, it appeared in every major American herbal pharmacopoeia, the reference books that doctors and apothecaries used before pharmaceutical companies existed. Samuel Thompson, the most widely read herbalist in early American medicine, ranked it among the top 12 plants every household should maintain. The United States Pharmacopoeia, which was the official drug reference for American physicians, listed plantain as a recognized medicinal agent in its 1860 edition. Frontier families did not have hospitals, they had gardens, And plantain was in almost all of them, not the flower bed, not the decorative border, the medicine patch, the practical patch, the part of the garden that was not about beauty, it was about survival. During the Civil War, Union field surgeons documented its use repeatedly in their medical reports. Private letters from soldiers describe being given plantain poultices for infected gunshot wounds when iodine ran out. At least 2 regimental surgeons referenced it by name in their after-action medical summaries from 1862 and 1863. It was not a folk remedy whispered between soldiers. It was a documented field intervention used by trained military physicians when conventional supplies failed. After the war, as American cities industrialized, the plant remained dominant in rural communities for another full generation. County fair records from Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania in the 1880s and 1890s listed in herb garden competitions. Amish settlements that were established during this period incorporated it into their standard growing practices, and unlike mainstream American culture, they never stopped. By 1900, broadleaf plantain was so common, so well understood, and so widely used that it required no explanation to any American who had grown up outside a city. It was simply there, in the yard, in the pasture, in the kitchen, in the remedy cabinet. 20 years later, it had begun to disappear, not because it failed anyone, because something more profitable had arrived to take its place. In 1906, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act. On paper, it was consumer protection. In practice, it handed a newly forming pharmaceutical industry the legal mechanism it needed, the ability to require proof before a plant could be sold as medicine. That sounds reasonable, until you realize who funded the science. The Rockefeller family had been methodically reorganizing American medicine since the 1890s. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil had already monopolized fuel. By 1910, his foundation was funding medical schools under a now famous internal document called the Flexner Report, a commissioned review of American medical education that recommended shutting down any school that taught herbal, homeopathic, or botanical medicine. Of the 155 medical schools operating in the United States in 1910, 102 were closed or consolidated within 15 years. The ones that survived were the ones teaching pharmaceutical-based medicine, the only kind of medicine that required the petrochemical industry to manufacture its products. You cannot patent a plant, you cannot hold a monopoly on something that grows in a ditch, but you can fund the regulatory agencies that decide what counts as medicine. You can fund the medical schools that train the doctors who write the prescriptions, and you can ensure that anything a patient could grow themselves is classified as either unproven, dangerous, or both. By 1930, plantain had been removed from the United States pharmacopoeia entirely. No study proved it was harmful. No documented case of injury was cited. It was simply removed, reclassified from medicine to weed in the span of a single generation, precisely as synthetic alternatives that could be manufactured, patented, and sold became commercially available. In 2015, the FDA moved against several herbal supplement companies selling concentrated plantain extract, issuing warning letters referencing inadequate substantiation of claimed benefits. The companies were small. The legal costs were not. Most complied, most stopped. The Amish did not receive those letters. They do not sell anything. They just grow it, use it, and teach their children to do the same. The Amish did not reject plantain because they were stubborn, they kept it because they were paying attention. When the federal government began subsidizing industrial agriculture in the 1930s and 1940s, most American farmers took the deal. Cheap synthetic fertilizer, hybrid seed programs, crop insurance tied to specific commodity plants. The Amish looked at those programs and declined. They did not accept federal subsidies. They did not participate in government seed initiatives. They kept their horses, kept their open-pollinated seed stocks, and kept their medicine gardens exactly as they were. Today, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, you can drive past an Amish property and see a dedicated herb row that has been maintained in some cases for over 120 years. Not restored, not revived, continuously maintained. Grandmother to mother to daughter, the same plants, the same practices, the same knowledge passed in the same language. Broadleaf plantain is always in that row. Amish women in these communities use fresh plantain leaf as a drawing poultice for splinters, bee stings, and infected cuts. Dried and tinctured, it is given to children for persistent coughs. Steeped in oil, it is used as a topical treatment for minor burns and skin inflammation. The practices are not identical across all Amish districts, but the plant appears in all of them, used for overlapping purposes, validated by over a century of consistent household results. They did not need a clinical trial. They had something more reliable, 4 generations of women who tracked what worked and taught what they knew. The knowledge survived because they refused every incentive to trade it away. And right now, that knowledge is available to anyone willing to grow a single plant in their yard, a plant that costs nothing, asks for nothing, and gives back more than almost anything else you will ever put in the ground. Here is what you actually need to know to start today. Broadleaf plantain seed is legal to purchase and grow in every state, regardless of its noxious weed classification. That classification applies to agricultural land management, not home gardens. You can order certified organic seed online for under $4 per packet, or you can do what most experienced growers do. Walk your neighborhood in early spring, find the plant already growing in a sidewalk crack or unmowed verge, and transplant a small rosette into a corner of your yard. It establishes in 2 weeks. Once established, it requires nothing. No watering beyond rain, no fertilizer, no pruning. It returns every year from the same root system. For wound care, the traditional method is what herbalists call a chew poultice. Take 2 or 3 fresh leaves, chew briefly until soft, and apply directly to an insect sting, splinter wound, or minor cut. Hold in place for 10 to 15 minutes. The results, reduce swelling, fast or close, are consistent enough that wilderness medicine instructors at several outdoor education organizations now include it in their field plant curricula. For respiratory use, steep 1 tablespoon of dried leaf in 8 ounces of near boiling water for 12 minutes. Strain, add honey if desired. The mucilaginous compounds in the leaf coat the throat in a way that over-the-counter cough syrups at $9 a bottle are attempting and often failing to replicate. A 100 square foot patch of broadleaf plantain, which is roughly the size of a parking space, produces enough leaf material in a single growing season to supply a household with fresh poultice material all summer, and enough dried leaf for teas and infusions through the winter. Total cost in year 1 under $5. Total cost in every year after that, 0. The pharmaceutical industry spent over a century convincing you this plant was useless. The Amish spent that same century proving otherwise. They classified it as a weed so you would pull it up. They removed it from the pharmacopoeia so you would stop trusting it. They restricted the companies that sold it so you would stop hearing about it. And it is still here. In every unmowed ditch, in every cracked sidewalk, in every Amish herb row in Lancaster County, the plant is still here. The knowledge is still here. It survived 100 years of systematic suppression because it kept growing back and because there were communities of people who refused to forget what it was for. You do not need permission to grow it. You do not need a prescription to use it. You do not need to spend $1 on it after the first season. All you need is a corner of your yard and the willingness to pay attention to something your great-grandmother already knew. Drop a comment right now and tell me, did you already have broadleaf plantain growing on your property without knowing what it was? Because I will bet a lot of you did. And if you want to keep learning what else the Amish are growing that the rest of us were taught to ignore, subscribe to this channel. We are building a community of people who know how to take care of themselves, and we are just getting started.